Although he was a mere child when these events actually took place, you would think that today's guest was actually at the trial of the Chicago 7. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, today's guest, Mr. Aaron Sorkin, is Oscar nominated for his screenplay for the trial of the Chicago 7, and I was quite pleased to have him back in the series, in the podcast. He's been with us as a screening for all of the films that he's written and directed, now that he's directing as well. And it was really great to once again connect with Sorkin for the podcast. I absolutely love his film. It's highly entertaining. One of the many triumphs Sorkin accomplished in his screenplay was taking history that's kind of complicated and making it just so digestible. Of course, one of the other elements that's so vibrant in this film is Americans' right to protest and to exercise their First Amendment rights of free speech, and then be stalled and stopped by the police, who kind of get away with stalling and stopping them, which is completely wrong, anti-democratic. And that vibrancy, certainly in lieu of the Black Lives Matters protests of 2020, really resonate in this movie and show us how big of a problem this was, not only back then, but still is today. Of course, it was fantastic to talk to Sorkin about the mechanics of a script and what went into bringing it to life on the screen. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, Sorkin is going to be back in the screening series again for the Oscar Screenwriting Nominees panel. That's right. We have 9 out of the 10 films that were nominated for Oscars for screenwriting that will be represented there. And what's really cool is if you want to see that episode early before anyone else in the world, I am exclusively premiering it at the 2021 Screencraft Writers Summit. That will be the first place that you could see it before it goes into the podcast in iTunes and Spotify and through the YouTube Backstory Magazine page. And what, might you ask, is the 2021 Screencraft Writers Summit? Well, they happen to be our sponsors today, so I'm going to tell you more about them. It is a virtual event, and it is taking place on the weekend of April 9th through the 11th. And anyone in the world could join, and there is so much to do there. First off, there's a whole bunch of great guest speakers. You could find a list of them over at screencraft.org/summit. But just to name a few: Malcolm Spellman from Falcon and Winter Soldier, Jack Schaefer from WandaVision, Eric Heiserer from that excellent sci-fi film Arrival, Meg LaFave from Inside Out, the creators of The Expanse. And the greatest part of all this is that not only are they our sponsor, but they are giving you a 10% admission coupon code. So if you use the coupon code QA podcast, that's the letter Q, the letter A, podcast, slammed together as all one word, QA podcast, over at screencraft.org/summit, you could save 10% off your admission. Remember, you still have time to register because it's the weekend of April 9th through April 11th, 2021. So check out the Screencraft Writers Summit so you can connect with fellow writers, industry professionals, hear great Q&As, and just get inspired. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I also hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And we're prepping our Oscar issue number 43, and that's going to be coming out around mid-April-ish. And there's going to be so much cool stuff in there to explore. But you could see what's inside issue 42 right now, because there's a lot of amazing stuff in there as well. And if you've never read us before, why not test drive us? You could read an entire free issue over at backstory.net or through our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, we hope that you'll consider becoming a subscriber. And I want to sweeten the deal for you, so I'm going to give you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory. And it'll give you any new content that we generate, along with access to our archive, which is constantly growing as we continue to add older issues. So it currently goes from about 42 to 29, and we're going to add new stuff as well. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where the Zoom casts of all these interviews go, support my passion project So thanks for considering becoming a Backstory subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with writer-director Aaron Sorkin about his Oscar-nominated screenplay, The Trial of the Chicago 7. Aaron Sorkin, it's good to see you through my computer screen. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks. It's good to see you too.
I missed you this year, because of the pandemic. This is the first time that we weren't able to do a screening in person. I had the pleasure of, doing a live screening with you of each of your films since Charlie Wilson's War. So
yeah. I've missed that too. Honestly, I've like everybody, I've missed personal contact. But I think the thing I've missed the most is being part of an audience and having the movie play to an audience. Chicago 7, like most of the movies we're talking about right now, has never played to an audience. It's played to a lot of different people at different times and different places. It's not exactly the same as an audience where you get to have that shared experience of the house lights coming down, everybody laughing at the same time, gasping at the same time, being silent at the same time. So I'm looking forward to that once it's safe.
Yeah, me too. And, I will say this because I have it in my notes for later. I actually saw it at the Rose Bowl Drive-In. Netflix did a screening. And there were moments your dialogue was so strong that people were literally honking their horns, which is the way that you applaud at a drive-in.
Well, I remember that night well. It was a great night. Netflix did an incredible job. We still had, steel cars in between us, but it was the closest we came to playing for an audience. And I definitely remember the horns honking.
It was great. I think I'm going to go back for just two questions. Previous stuff, because we've done a lot of interviews before, but I just want to give folks a baseline for you again, and then we're going to get into Trial of Chicago 7.
Okay.
Just going way back in your life, at what point did you realize that you wanted to write out of a passion for writing and knew that this could be something that could be a career? Everyone knows you started as a playwright, but at what point did you realize it was going to be the only path that you were going to go on?
It was on. I mean this. I know exactly when. It was on a Friday night when I was 21 years old. I had, up until that point, I thought what I was an actor. And that's all I ever wanted to be. It's what I studied in school. And I did a lot of, I was in the drama club. I did a lot of community theater. And, of course, in college, I did a lot of theater. But on this one Friday night, I was sharing a tiny studio apartment on the Upper East Side of New York, where for $250 a month, I could sleep on my friend's futon. And friend was out of town for the weekend. It was one of those Friday nights in New York where you feel like everyone's been invited to a party that you haven't been invited to. I didn't have $3 in my pocket and nothing in the apartment that could entertain you. The television, the stereo, was working. The only thing that was working was an old semi-automatic typewriter that was in the apartment. A semi-automatic typewriter is electric keys and a manual return. And I stuck a piece of paper in the typewriter and for the first time in my life, wrote for pleasure, wrote for something other than a chore to be gotten through for a school assignment. And for the first time, wrote dialogue. I just started writing a play. And I stayed up that whole night, and I feel like that night never ended. Now, it's tough. You don't overnight change your identity completely. You're not willing to do that, to say, well, I'm not an actor anymore. I'm a playwright now. But what I did do, the first play I was writing was A Few Good Men. And I took a 4-day break from writing A Few Good Men to write a one-act play that I was going to submit to a one-act play festival, and it got accepted. And I cast myself in the play to play opposite Nathan Lane. And we were on stage one night, and I was just watching Nathan, and I thought, God, this guy is good. Wouldn't it be great if all the actors in my play were this good? And that was the last time I acted, and that was when I said, all right, you're obviously a playwright.
What was the name of the one act?
It was a one-act play called Hidden in This Picture, based on an article I'd read in the New York Times about Alan Alda. When Alan Alda was directing the movie Sweet Liberty, and he was starring in it too, and I think he'd written it. And it was just an article about how Alan Alda is really as nice a guy as everybody thinks Alan Alda is, but that the one moment he lost it during the shoot was when he was getting a shot at magic hour at sunset. And it was a very long shot, just sort of up a huge hill, and someone on horseback was supposed to move into the shot. And, you know, when it's a shot at magic hour, you only have so many minutes to get this. You're not going to be able to get that many shots at it. And they were right about to go when out of nowhere a cow wandered into the shot. Alan Alda lost his mind, started shouting, "Cow, get out of the shot! Get out of the shot!" And the DP came over to him and said, "Don't worry, we can mat the cow out later." And Alan Alda shouted, "All right, cow, you can stay where you are." And that somehow inspired me to write a one-act play.
Has it ever been published anywhere?
Yes, it's published in a volume of the best short plays of, I can't remember what year it was.
Okay.
But
well, so all right, here's my last question before we get to trial. It's you know, with a few years of Molly's Game behind you, you're now able to look back in hindsight. What do you think was an important lesson that you learned from Molly's Game, the last film that you made before this? And then we're going to move right into your film.
Boy, on Molly's Game, but there are a lot of lessons that I learned on Molly's Game. You know, sort of learning as you go in front of millions of people isn't the easiest thing in the world, but you're lucky if you get to do that. So I learned a lot there. I also remember on Molly's Game, one of the actors in the cast, Kevin Costner, was himself an Academy Award-winning director. So I got some great tips from him, but I think I learned a lot on Molly's Game that I was able to bring to Chicago 7, learned a lot on Chicago 7 that I'm now able to bring to what I'm doing. But I would say the biggest lesson, don't give up on a take. If you're, yes, with the kind of tight budgets that I've had to work with, and tight scheduling, you have to keep it moving. But don't say to yourself, well, that's as good as it's going to get. I'll live with it and move on.
I think that's fantastic advice. All right. So we're gonna get to the boring part now. The question you've been asked a million times. How did you get the idea for Trial of the Chicago 7? And give us the Cliff Notes version of the production history, how it was going to Spielberg to direct, and then it wound up back with you. I know this has been done a million times before. I just want to give folks a baseline before we get into it.
Sure. Well, how I got the idea for Chicago 7 is easy. On a Saturday morning in 2006, I was asked to come over to Steven Spielberg's house, which I just want to be clear isn't common. I don't hang out with Steven Spielberg on Saturday mornings. And he told me he wanted to make a movie about the Chicago 7. I said, the Chicago 7, that sounds great. Count me in. Let's do it. Left his house, called my father, and asked my father who the Chicago 7 were. I was just saying yes to Steven Spielberg. I had a vague sense that in 1968 at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, there had been some civil unrest. I had a vague sense that Abby Hoffman was a counterculture figure, and all I really knew about Tom Hayden was that he'd been married to Jane Fonda for a while. So
right.
I had to educate myself, and read about a dozen good books, some of them written by the defendants. There's a 21,000-page trial transcript. But most critically, I got to spend time with Tom Hayden, who was alive at the time. He passed away in 2006, but he was alive. And after the research part comes the climbing the walls part. Months of pacing around and not being able to sleep and just trying to figure out what movie you're going to write. I mean, I had a lot of information. I could have dramatized a Wikipedia page, which is pretty much what the first draft was like. But I didn't know what I was going to write yet. And as I said, I wrote a clunky first draft that was really no more than a history lesson, an exercise in nostalgia. And after that, decided I've got to decide what story I'm going to tell. And it came down to, it sort of organized itself into 3 stories that I was going to tell at once. The courtroom drama, the evolution of the riot. How did what was supposed to be a peaceful protest devolve into such a violent clash with the police and with the National Guard? And then the third story would be the more personal story between Tom and Abby, 2 guys on the same side who can't stand each other, and each thinks the other is doing harm to the cause. That third story, which I think is the one that's most important to the film, it sort of gives it a pulse, gives it blood, was one that I would not have been able to get from the 12 books or from the 21,000-page trial transcript. Only would have been able to get that from Tom.
Abby wasn't around either because he died in 89.
Abby had committed suicide in 1989.
Yeah.
Jerry Rubin was killed when he was jaywalking near the campus of UCLA in Westwood, and he got hit and killed by a car.
I think personalizing it between that Abby and Tom clash is definitely what grounds it. So that's good to say. You know, we're in the non-spoiler section right now, and we'll get to the spoilers, but just a few things about your process. Sure. And we've talked about this before, but especially here with 21,000 pages, 12 books, how long did you allow yourself for a research period that you were also presumably outlining during before you actually started writing that first draft?
You know, it takes a while for me to start writing because I'm not disciplined. I'm not a writer who can go to their office at 9 o'clock, start writing, finish at 6 o'clock, go home, do the same thing on the next day. The struggle isn't the writing; it's the not writing. It's that part where you don't know how to start. You're searching for what I need to cling to. You and I have talked about this a lot, is intention and obstacle. Okay. Somebody wants something standing in their way of getting it. You've got to locate that. There were so many characters to wrangle. There are 8 members of the Chicago 7. They have lawyers. There are the prosecutors. There's Judge Hoffman. There are the witnesses. So, it seemed like a pack of wild animals that I was trying to get to, not march in a parade, march in something more complicated than that. So you ask how much time I allow myself. It's not a matter of allowing myself time. I can't write until I know what I'm going to write. Now, when I know what I'm going to write, what that first scene is about, and I don't wait to know what the whole thing is before I start writing. There isn't an outline. What you'll see if you came into my office is you'd see some index card. If I was just starting, you'd see a few index cards up on a corkboard. You'd see the first scene, the second scene, and the third scene, but the second and third would become a little less detailed, okay? So it's kind of like walking forward in the dark with a flashlight. You can only see how far that beam will go, but the further you walk, the further you can see. Then when you get to the end, when you get to fade out, here's a recommendation to any new writers who might be listening to this. If you get to page 40 and you feel like you want to start again, don't. Keep going. Get to the end and then go back and start. By the time you get to the end, you may have a 300-page first draft, but you'll know a lot more about the movie that you want to write and what doesn't need to be in it anymore. You can start taking things away, and you can start underlining things. You can start hanging the lantern on things. And you know what the important beats are. Very famously, that is what happened to Annie Hall, but in the editing room, instead of on the page, right? Well,
yeah, because it was a very long movie that they cut down, reshaped.
That was almost unrelated to the Annie Hall that we know now, and it didn't have the same title. I can't remember the title, but the title is a psychiatric term for somebody who is unable to enjoy anything if anyone in the world is unhappy.
he also reshot, which was a luxury that most people don't have.
Most people don't have that luxury. But
wait, I want to go back to you for a second, because it is.
You don't want to talk about Annie Hall for now?
I love Annie Hall, but I want to talk about you. Like, I love this idea of seeing only what the flashlight is showing you in the darkness, and that outlining stage is tough for people. And there's no one way to do it. You know, as William Goldman said, nobody knows anything. Mm-hmm. Whatever works for you works for you. And it's interesting though, because you had all this research. How long was your first draft? Because your advice just now of stay with it and finish it, it's what gives writers that clay to sculpt with, by having a draft in front of them versus having nothing. So how long was your first draft?
It was long, even by my standards. My first drafts can be well over 200 pages. I think the first draft of The American President was 355 pages. And you're talking about the clay to sculpt with, you know, very famously, I'm sure the story is apocryphal, but when somebody asked Michelangelo, you know, how did you make David? He said, I took a chunk of marble and I took away everything that wasn't David. I think it was probably harder than that, than what he's describing.
Of course.
But it is something to think about. The first draft, it was a couple of hundred pages. Like I said, it wasn't much more than a dramatized Wikipedia page. And I wanted to do something better than that.
Do you remember any interesting notes from Spielberg at that stage when you're showing him those drafts, or had he not seen something that early? Obviously, he probably
no. He saw it that early, and listen, the notes that I got essentially were saying to me, they weren't detailed notes. Essentially, it was a very polite, professional way of saying start again. At least that's what I heard. Was start again. And I hate that. I want to turn in a first draft where suddenly everybody gets excited and they start making the movie. Now, it didn't stop Steven from starting to make the movie. It was on that draft and at that point that Steven cast Sacha Baron Cohen in the movie. And then 14 years later, Sacha appeared in the movie. But an important note that I got would come from Paul Greengrass, actually. At this point, we're now a few years down the road. Steven has decided he's going to produce the movie and have someone else direct it, that there's probably a better director for the film. That was his opinion. I think he's out of his mind. And that next director would be Paul Greengrass. And I went to London to meet with Paul Greengrass, and there were other people at the table. There were some producers at the table and that kind of thing. And at one moment, Paul plainly wanted to speak to me privately, and he asked me to go out on the sidewalk with him and have a cigarette. So we did, and he asked me to tell him the story of the film. Just tell him the story. Which is, if you are a writer and you have a friend who'll say that. Tell me the story, okay? And it's usually in saying it out loud that you can find out some things. You can find out where there's a hole, where suddenly, gee, I'm not really able to articulate this next part. Or you will say something along the way, like I did, that you'll see what I mean. I tell Paul Greengrass the story, and somewhere in the telling of the story, I refer to Tom and Abby as two brothers who are on the same side and they can't stand each other and that kind of thing. And when I finished the whole recitation of the story, Paul said, "Write about the two brothers." So that was a terribly important note that I got. I went back and did that. There were, I believe, a total of 32 drafts of the screenplay, and I just have lost track of what number draft that would have been.
And at what point did you become the director?
When every other member of the DGA we've gone through all of them. Here's what happened. One of the reasons it took the film as long to get made as it did was that the riot scenes were budget busters.
Sure.
You can do a movie like Chicago 7. It's got to fit into a budget that the studio feels is proportional to what the audience appetite for a film like this is going to be. In other words, you're not going to have a lot of money to make Chicago 7. And then Donald Trump got elected president, and he would have rallies, and there'd be a protester at the rally. Trump would get nostalgic about the old days when they used to drag that guy out of here on a stretcher, and I'd like to punch him right in the face, and let's beat the crap out of him. And Steven decided the time to make this movie was now. By then, I had directed Molly's Game, and he was pleased enough with it that he thought I should direct Chicago 7, and he said, and now the riots are your problem.
When you're pitching it to somebody like Netflix, who wound up making it, was there ever a possibility it would become a series? Because you obviously could have made a longer version of this. I think what you made is great, but I'm just curious if that was ever thought about for a moment.
Well, first of all, I wasn't involved in the pitching to Netflix, and the movie had been made by the time Paramount was supposed to be our distributor.
Got it.
And sometime last spring, and I'm very grateful to Paramount for being generous enough to let Netflix have it, because the alternative would have been waiting a year, and we wanted the film to come out before the election.
Which was crucial, and I'm glad that you did.
Yeah, me too. Last spring, we were on a marketing Zoom with Paramount's marketing department, as well as Jim Giannopoulos, the chairman at Paramount. And at the end of the marketing call, Jim said, who wanted the film to come out before the election too, listen, guys, we don't know what the exhibition business is going to be like in the fall. Should we at least dip our toe in the world of streamers? And they took it out to the streamers, and there was a pretty competitive bidding war for it. We wound up at Netflix, which was like having a lifeboat come along that has luxury cabins and a buffet. It's been a fantastic place to be there. Very talented group of people who really love movies.
It couldn't have been better placement. Okay, so last question before we get to the spoiler section. I have two small questions, but this is just on research again. Do you want to tell us about anything that was interesting that you found through the Freedom of Information Act, possibly through FBI files, if that was something that you utilized? And then anything that you learned as a tip for collating a lot of research, because, research is a way to get the story brewing in your mind before some of those first pages. But some writers can get lost in research. So I'm just curious what guides you.
You can get lost in research. And the most difficult part of the research period is the beginning, because you don't know what you're looking for yet. Whether you're sitting down and talking to Tom Hayden, reading a book, reading the transcript, talking to one of the many journalists who covered the riots in '68, who covered the convention and the protests, you don't know what to ask yet. You're really on a fishing expedition. It gets easier and more fun when you do know what you're looking for. But again, I'm looking for conflict. I'm looking for intention and obstacle. Where are those points of conflict? And so the best I can do organization-wise is, again, if you came into my office, you'd see a couple of cards on a bulletin board, and you'd see sort of little piles of research laid out on the floor with signs over them, kind of categorizing them as different things. And in the writing process, you'll change what the categories are and move things around. Eventually, those things are going to boil down to scenes.
That makes sense. I mean, it's a long process. Was there anything you want to tell us about under the Freedom of Information Act from the FBI files?
There was nothing under FOIA because a lot of those FBI files have been declassified, and I was able to pretty easily read them.
Sure. All right. What was your budget and schedule? That's my last non-spoiler question.
Oh, the budget is two different numbers because Remember I said that Steven started making the movie back in 1845 or something? Money was spent and interest was racking up on that money spent. So $13 million in dead money was already accrued, which means if you had a $14 million budget, you had $1 million to spend on the movie. We had $24 million to spend on the movie, $24 million to put up on screen. I think 36 shooting days.
Wow. Okay.
I think I may be off by a day in one direction.
You got a lot on the screen for 36 shooting days. All right. Well, so, podcast listeners, folks watching on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, please go see Trial of the Chicago 7 if you haven't already, because we are getting into the spoilers section. Press pause, go watch it. By this point, you should have watched it at least once, hopefully twice. But okay, we're getting into the spoiler section, so you've been forewarned. This is just kind of an easy first question. There's something that I noticed that's new in your work. You have always had a great grip on ensemble writing. But when it comes to your feature films, you tend to hang it around one character, right? Charlie Wilson's War, The Social Network, Steve Jobs, he's right in the title. Molly's Game, she's right in the title. Here you give just a virtuoso performance as an orchestrator of this ensemble cast where everybody seems to have the right amount of time and moments, but it wasn't hung around one person, or at least I didn't feel it was. And I say that as a compliment. What was the challenge of writing something like that? Because obviously the two brothers, you're right, totally forms the heart, but you have the people that go beyond the seven themselves as well. So I'm just curious what the challenges were for you as you challenged yourself in kind of a new structure here, a new form.
Well, I really appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. It was an ensemble. Before I answer your question, I'll just say that this cast, this phenomenal cast, most of them are used to starring in their own movies. They're not used to being part of an ensemble. So I really appreciate how much they alchemized, how much they came together, how much they like to pass as much as they like to shoot. It was coming to work every morning. I felt like I was getting tossed the keys to a Formula One race car, and all I had to do was not put the car in the wall, and these actors were going to win the race. The challenge in writing an ensemble is we have to care about everybody. And everybody needs an intention and an obstacle, and we have to care about everybody. You can't, if you suddenly go to a scene with Joe Gordon-Levitt, we can't be feeling like, bring Abby and Jerry back on the screen. You've got to care about everybody.
I think that's a good way to kind of focus it. I'm curious that, usually we've talked in the past about you going through your drafts for ensemble writing and kind of doing a character specific double check or character specific pass. Was that something that you felt you needed to do here with so many characters in which you would hyper focus on one as you would go through the entire draft?
What I do, and I want to do this more because it's helpful when I do it, and when I don't do it, I can tell I didn't do it. And this may not be for everybody. I'm very physical when I write. I play all the parts. I'm talking out loud. I'm getting up and down from my chair. I mean, if it's going well, I get excited. It's like that. And I said I play all the parts. Sometimes that's not true. Sometimes there's one part that I'm playing, and everyone else's dialogue is just kind of utilitarian and serves that one character that's the star of the moment. That way lies badness. So what I'll do when I'm thinking right is I'll go back through the past and I'll play a different part now. I'll cast myself as someone else. And if I'm not excited about what I'm doing as that actor, that role needs to be sharpened.
Ooh, hey, I just wanted to jump in really quick and remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. You know, folks, we have got a lot going on, and we are going to be coming out with our Oscar issue 43, quite soon. But if you've never read us before, I hope you check out the free issue over at backstory.net or through our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And just to sweeten the deal, I want to throw you a discount coupon code, which is SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. And that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine, which will give you access to the new content we produce. And it will also give you access to our archive, which goes from about issue 29 to issue 42. And we are trying to add further old issues into our archive as we continue to produce new content. So it's kind of a juggling trick, but don't worry, kids, we're doing it. So we're going to be adding newer, older issues. Look, there's a lot to explore. I'll tell you really quick 2 things that I love in the current issue, even though I love so much of the current issue, including our cover story on the 12 Monkeys, a movie I've long been obsessed with. But, you know, we have a section called Off the Shelf, where we take screenplays that are unproduced by writers of note, and we bring them to you along with an interview. And in issue 42, our current issue, we have Simon Kinberg of X-Men Days of Future Past with his screenplay Ghouls of New York, which was the first script he sold when he got out of college. It's based on a true story of grave robbers from the 1890s in New York, and it's quite a trip to read. I actually still hope it would get made one day. We also have in that same issue, writer-director Joe Carnahan's passion project, LA 57, which has a really cool noir vibe, but it's something that him and his brother, Matthew Michael Carnahan, co-wrote, and they have been trying to make for 10 years. And honestly, they're getting really close. And they shared some production art with us, some concept art, and of course, the entire screenplay for you to read, along with an interview with Joe Carnahan, kind of talking you through it, the big points and the challenges. So anyhow, there's so much else to explore in Backstory. So I really hope you check it out and consider becoming a subscriber. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also support our sponsor for this episode, Screencraft, the Writer Summit. And you could check out and learn everything about it. It's happening April 9th through the 11th. And if you go to screencraft.org/summit, you'll be able to read about all the great guest speakers that they're going to have there, along with the literary agents and managers that they're going to have for you to meet as well. This is an online conference, basically, where you will be able to connect with other writers through some really interesting virtual spaces that they've created. And they've really risen to the challenge of bringing people together during a pandemic. So you don't even have to leave your home, kids. And the cool thing is, as our sponsors, they've given us a discount code that you could use if you want to register for the conference and save 10%. That's discount coupon code QA podcast. That's the letter Q, the letter A, the word podcast, and it's all slammed together as one word. So QA podcast, and you enter it over at screencraft.org/summit. And of course, on their website, you could see who's speaking, ranging from Jack Schaefer of WandaVision, Malcolm Spellman of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Eric Heiserer of Arrival, the creators of The Expanse, and so many more folks. And one of the interesting things is I am going to be premiering my Oscar screenwriting nominees panel there before it's seen anywhere else in the world. So that's just another reason why I highly suggest you use discount code QA podcast over at screencraft.org/summit to register. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our conversation with writer-director Aaron Sorkin about his Oscar-nominated screenplay, The Trial of the Chicago 7. Obviously, having a way to hang this on a central antagonist was important. And, you know, Judge Hoffman certainly was a perfect person to throw into that role, even though you have the extraneous antagonism of the Chicago police force. I'm curious what the challenges were of figuring out how much screen time Judge Hoffman should have by being this obstacle, because it's clear from the first scene. But I mean, you did a fantastic job of showing what he did to Bobby Seale and the other moments where he stood in their way. But was there any difficulty to that balancing act? Because you have so much story to tell and so many things competing.
First of all, the primary antagonists, you named the Chicago Police Department, an esoteric antagonist. the primary antagonists are never seen in the film. Primary antagonist is Richard Nixon. Sure. And John Mitchell, who we see in one scene at the beginning. But these guys are on trial because, as Michael Keaton's character, the former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, tries desperately to tell us on the witness stand before he's kicked off the stand, Richard Nixon gets elected president. He's inherited a very unpopular war, which these guys are making more unpopular every day. Plus, they're representing an existential threat to the American way of life that Richard Nixon and Richard Nixonites are trying to preserve. The long hair and the clothes and the drugs and the music and the protesting, the anti-Americanness, which was we think it wasn't there in the 50s, but of course the beginning of the civil rights movement was happening in the 50s. That's what's coming down on these guys. The decision by Nixon's attorney general: I am going to decapitate the anti-war movement, and with one stroke decapitate the counterculture movement. The cultural revolution that Abby keeps talking about, that was the obstacle. Judge Hoffman was the instrument of that obstacle, so he gets to appear as the antagonist. The difficulty is that with any antagonist, as the writer, you need to be able to defend that character. You need to be able to write the character as if they're making their case to God why they should be allowed into heaven. Okay? You can't judge the character. And Frank Langella has said a few times that he was very happy that there was no scene in the script where we see Judge Hoffman mending the wing of a bird, or being a very sweet grandpa, that kind of thing. But the fact is that Hoffman, like all of Hoffman's, Judge Hoffman, like all of his bosses, is there as the final line of defense between America and the people who want to hurt America. And he believes that he is doing something heroic, that he's standing up to something terrible.
It's the concept of the villain is still a hero in their own mind. So
exactly right. We don't have to look far today to find people who are desperately trying to keep Niagara Falls from coming down, right? In Georgia, they just flat out went back to Jim Crow this week, right? They're just it's straight up trying to make it harder for black people to vote. And with Judge Hoffman, of any of the characters in this story, he is the one for whom I was able to use the most from the transcript, from the trial transcript. All of his interactions with Bobby Seale are right from the trial transcript.
I mean, it was a fantastic job. And, I, not to get personal here, but we did a quarantine watch of West Wing over the summer. My 14-year-old and I and my mom. And it just, it was wonderful. And
thank you.
The kids were glued to the TV with me during the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer. And they saw the injustices that police do to protesters in the name of, security or letter of the law, even though they also saw how other protesters were not messed with as much by the police, and realized the difference in the color of their skin. But I had
good for them for seeing that.
Yeah, and I had people send me your script, and I decided not to read it. Just it was nearing the release because I always love to go in cold. And the kids wanted to go with me to the drive-in, and I have an 11-year-old daughter, and she wanted to go too. And they're like, "Well, what is this movie going to be?" And I'm like, I would give them an explanation. I'm like, but you guys have never really seen a courtroom drama, so it's probably going to be more on that. But as you said earlier, you split it up between these three elements of the brothers, the riots and the escalation, and the courtroom, and it really was a symphony. And the kids those phones never came out for a minute during your movie, and I think that's your hat trick in this movie. and why it's Oscar nominated. Congrats again on your Oscar nomination. And
thanks very much.
I want to talk about that for a second structurally, because there is kind of a ho-hum to courtroom dramas occasionally. And it was really your structure that kept a sense of audience engagement and, more importantly, urgency. This sense of urgency, because anytime we would go back to those scenes in the flashback structure, they didn't feel like flashbacks. They felt present tense. So tell us about the difficulties of wrangling that structure. So there was always something, I hate to say, but there was always new juice going on. There was always something that was a jab in the arm that was just great. And that's no small feat. So tell us about your structure and managing those three elements.
Sure. Well, first, kudos to your kids. They're very bright. Wrangling the structure was a big part of the job. And I just knew if I could do it well, it would really pay off. And because you're keeping a bunch of balls up in the air at once. You're also, anything you can do to make the audience more than a passive observer of what's going on, just to make the audience sit forward a little bit, have to use their own head to start putting puzzle pieces together, to, like I said, to make them an active participant instead of somebody watching a sporting event. I think you're doing yourself a big favor. Because I chose to, we have a prologue, okay, which does a couple of things I wanted to accomplish in that first 7 minutes. First of all, I wanted to parachute you into something that was already going 100 miles an hour, which was the year 1968, where the wheels came off the wagon in this country, right? I don't mean to be glib about it, but the escalating draft totals, the escalating deaths coming back from Vietnam, the assassination of Martin Luther King, and then a matter of weeks later, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, unrest on college campuses all across the country, unrest in cities all across the country. I wanted to drop the audience into that reality, though that would be the very last time I would remind them that it was 1968. I want to take a tiny detour off the question you asked me. I promise I'll get back to it. But from the beginning, I wanted the movie to be about today and not 1968. None of us had any idea how much about today it would end up being. We even last winter when we were making the film, we thought the film was plenty relevant then, a year ago winter. We didn't need it to get more relevant, but it did last spring with the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, protests against the police all over the country and in a number of those cities, the protesters being met by riot clubs and tear gas. To say nothing of January 6th, when Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and God knows how many others stood at a microphone, did exactly what the Chicago 7 were on trial for doing. I told, when it came time to make the film, I made it clear to our DP, Faden Papa-Michael, our editor, Alan Baumgarten, both of whom were nominated for Oscars, all our designers, all our department heads. The film is about today. It's not, we're going to be true to the period, but we're not going to flood the frame with 60s iconography. We're not going to flood the frame with peace signs, with tie-dye, with a psychedelic aesthetic, and that the score was not going to be source music. It was not going to be the usual 60s protest songbook. You're not going to hear Fortunate Son, Sympathy for the Devil. It is going to be a Daniel Pemberton orchestral film score. And so, like I said, back to the prologue, where I did need to show, here's what was going on right at this moment, that the pot was practically boiling over. It's just going to take another 2 degrees for that to happen. I also needed to introduce you to the Chicago 7, all 8 members of the Chicago 7. And I wanted to show you that they weren't all of the same stripe, that they're not just, long-haired hippies, that these different groups, the SDS, the MOB, the Yippies, the Black Panthers, very, very different groups.
And Dillinger, the Scoutmaster dad.
And Dillinger, the Boy Scoutmaster. And pacifist, conscientious objector. And then finally, I needed to raise the temperature on both sides. We're going to Chicago, thousands of us, to protest, and Mayor Daley, who we did not mention among the antagonists, obviously Mayor Daley was one.
Right.
And Mayor Daley upping the number of riot troops he's going to bring in. Now he's bringing in 10,000 National Guardsmen. This was just a recipe for disaster in Chicago. We end with Walter Cronkite saying a Democratic convention is about to begin in a police state. There doesn't seem to be any other way to say it. And we go to black.
It is fascinating because you're right. I'm sorry to interrupt, but like you did a major exposition dump right in the beginning of the film in a very entertaining fashion, rather than coming later to just get to set the stage, to do the preamble. And that is a fascinating element of structure as well. Thank you.
And then we skip over the riots. It's now many months later, and we're in the Attorney General's office, and he's telling Richard Schultz, Joe Gordon-Levitt, I want you to prosecute these guys. They're going to get 10 years in federal prison. And I think that because of that one move, skipping over the riots and waiting to kind of dole it out to you in the courtroom, in our minds, that they don't feel like flashbacks. It feels like now we're in present day. Now we see what happened.
I mean, it worked expertly. It really was it, because you're right, because a sequential movie would have started with the riots first, then wound up in court, like an episode of Law and Order or something like that.
That's right.
And I was really glad that it didn't. You know, the surprise in the movie that came out, and there was a lot of surprises, but it was the use of Michael Keaton as Ramsey, and how that came into being a key part of the trial. At what point did you realize how big that scene was going to be, both at his house and when he shows up in court? Because that was kind of the hidden gun that is coming externally, right? It's using their legal minds and using their knowledge of the period, and you have all of your main characters involved with it, especially the brothers, right, and the lawyers. But I'm just curious when that came about, because it was just another jab in the arm when we think we know everything that's going to happen, and here's another surprise.
That's the moment in the movie that Aristotle tells us we need a reversal. These guys, what's happened to Bobby has happened to Bobby. And, everybody's dejected and they think they've lost. And then, somebody says something that makes a light bulb go off. And why in the world wasn't this the first witness we called? We've got to get to Ramsey Clark. And we set Ramsey up very early in the movie, with John Mitchell complaining about how long it took him to resign as Attorney General. When did I know the scene was going to be big? When I got word that Michael Keaton was asking, has that role been cast yet? And he wants to play it.
Wow. That's great. I mean, it's a great scene. I'm curious how you found your ending point. There's a million different ways that you could kind of bring this into that emotionally connected endpoints. But again, since we're in the spoiler section, for me, you did the classic setup and payoff of watching the names on television of those who died in Vietnam, which is what the protest was about to begin with. And you skip forward, we're going sequentially in the trial, but you skip forward to day 151 and the decision to read those names in court, and to remind the public what they were there protesting about to begin with, now that they know that the spotlight is on them in the courtroom as well. It was a great scene, and I could have seen a version of this without it, because, again, it's day 151. You had so much material you had to leave on the floor that I'm sure was great. Tell us about the construction of that scene.
Sure. In your question, you mentioned a couple of things, actually, that you had asked me earlier about Spielberg's notes. And one of the notes he gave, this was very late now. This is when I had become the director, we were making the movie now. I remember him saying, I wouldn't mind seeing more circus in the courtroom. The fact of the matter is, in reality, it was much crazier than what I showed you. Arlo Guthrie tried playing all of Alice's Restaurant on the witness stand. Allen Ginsberg tried reciting all of Howl on the witness stand. It was the craziest trial in American history. In terms of the ending and the reading of the names, dramatically, I had a problem. And I'm glad we're in the spoiler section, that this is just for people who've seen it. Because they were found guilty, but shortly after an appeals court threw out the verdict, and the Justice Department decided not to retry these guys. In other words, it was 6 months of drama that ended in kind of an anticlimax, which is why in the movie you never see a staple of courtroom dramas, which is the jury foreman standing up and reading whether they're guilty or not guilty. What we see is we establish the courtroom. We see the jury box is empty. We see that 2 of the Chicago 7, Freunds and Weiner, are no longer sitting at the defendant's table, that they're sitting in the gallery, and then suddenly the 5 remaining members of the Chicago 7 come in, and they're now in prison gear. Hoffman comes in and says, before sentencing, so we know now what's happened. So what? And this is a good example of by the way, of get to the end, and then you'll know what the movie's about. Because of the discovery of the 2 brothers angle of the story, and because Tom Hayden was constantly being accused by Abby and others of being not just timid, but too obsequious for their taste to the court. Remember early on, Abby says, "Did you get a haircut for court?" You did, didn't you?
Right.
You got a haircut for court. I can't relate to that. And this was happening over and over to Tom, and he's the only one standing when they all decide they're not going to stand for the judge. And an emotional ending to this would be an act of defiance on Tom Hayden's part, right? The ultimate act of defiance. So I have Judge Hoffman lay it out as clearly as he can. If you make a statement that is brief, respectful, and without any political content, I will take that into consideration when sentencing you. In other words, just do what I'm telling you right now, and you'll go to jail for less time than you ordinarily would. It's a pretty good offer for most people. And I told Eddie, listen, you didn't come into court today planning on doing this, planning on, you were going to do basically what Hoffman's telling you to do. You were going to say a few words about the Vietnam War, and then ask the court for mercy. And that it's only until Hoffman pushes you over that line that you make the decision. Since this trial began, 4,732 U.S. troops have been killed in Vietnam. And the following are their names. And, Hoffman starts going crazy. This is going to take 10 hours to read these names. And that's how we end.
Was there another ending that you ever played with? Like before you arrived at that?
There must have been, because I know that wasn't my first ending. And I just can't remember what the other ones were. But it isn't until you get to the end of whether it's the first draft or the 10th draft, it isn't until you get to the end and see that the emotional part of this movie, it wasn't an idea. It doesn't rest in the hands of the jury. It isn't even people getting, clubbed in the head. it's looking power in the eye. It's standing up to power. It's risk. It's sacrifice. It's that kind of bravery. So I was determined from the beginning that this film have, for lack of a better word, a happy ending. Not a happy ending, but an ending that lifts us up.
Sure.
I wanted to feel good at the end of the film. I wanted to give everybody the goosebump experience, put a lump in your throat, and that I saw, the way to do this is to have Tom Hayden just in this moment represent the power of your voice.
It's a great ending. We're running out of time. My last question to you is your toughest scene. This couldn't have been an easy project. So what was your toughest scene on the page to get a wrestle on? And what was your toughest scene as a director on set?
Toughest scene on the page, I have to say maybe Abby's testimony.
Okay.
At the end. Toughest scene is the director. And remember, I'm right now in the middle of directing for the third time. And
yes, I just want to thank you, by the way. We're doing this on a weekend. You have been shooting during the week.
Yes.
And I really want to thank you for your time. It means a lot to me. So
it's my pleasure, believe me. But I still have never written a screenplay knowing that I was going to be directing it. Didn't know that I was going to be directing Molly's Game. Didn't know I was going to be directing Chicago 7. And now this new one is called Being the Ricardos. And I didn't know I was directing that when I was writing it, which is probably a good thing. Because if I'd known that I was going to be directing Chicago 7 when I was writing it, I would have somehow found a way to do it without the riots. I would have somehow found a way to do the trial of the Chicago 7 without the riots. Because it's easy enough to... First of all, listen, you're kind of familiar with my work.
Yes, sir.
I'm most comfortable just with people talking in rooms. I need those four walls. Once I write EXT period, I start to get nervous. I don't know where I am. I kind of don't have coordinates to go by. It wasn't that easy for me writing the riot scenes, but at least I was kind of general and thinking to myself, well, a director is going to come along and he's going to have a shot list. He's going to know exactly, right now we're going to get a tight shot of a club hitting a head and that kind of thing. So riot's easy enough to write on the page, much harder if you're me to direct those scenes, especially because, remember, back to our first thing, those were the budget busters. You have to get very creative. And I'll try to say this quickly, but when you have to make a creative choice because of a budgetary necessity, you want it to end up looking like that's what you would have done even if you'd had an unlimited budget, that was just the right thing to do. And I was able to, with Phaedon Papamichael and Alan Baumgarten, we were able to come up with a plan for those riots and because we were able to shoot in Grant Park in Chicago, we were able to match our original footage with archival footage, which we didn't try to fake and pretend that we had shot it. We put it in black and white. And we were able to basically grocery shop, put all this stuff together and make it into the riot sequences. But easier said than done.
Do you think it was storyboarding, like those intimate moments, so that you could get like right up close to the flagpole when things are starting to go south? Because again, that's what you did. You punched in rather than a cast of thousands. You made the personal moments, the moments that popped.
It's exactly right. It's because we didn't have a cast of thousands that we had to, this was going to be about tight shots. This was going to be about a pair of eyes right before a club came in, of blood coming down, of a tear gas canister getting loaded. We got a bunch of good wide shots, which because of the tear, I don't mean to be glib about this, but because of the tear gas, because of the smoke, I could create a sense by putting people at the perimeter of the smoke. I could create a sense that there were a lot more people behind them. I just couldn't have them travel very far. But it was a combination of the tight shots, the couple of handfuls of wide shots, and the archival footage, and a brilliant editor putting them together that did it.
It was fantastic. Well, look, you have been very generous with your time. Congrats again on your Oscar nomination for this amazing script. I can't wait to see what you do next. Thanks so much, Aaron.
I really appreciate it. I always do.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Aaron Sorkin for being so generous with his time, for coming down and speaking about his Oscar-nominated screenplay, The Trial of the Chicago 7. And folks, if for any reason you haven't yet seen The Trial of the Chicago 7, let's fix that. Go over to Netflix, watch it, and see this extraordinary screenplay come to life. Of course, special thanks to our sponsors again, the Screencraft Writing Summit. You can find everything you need to know about it over at screencraft.org/summit. Look, this is really an amazing virtual event where you can not only hear a bunch of fantastic writers speak, but you could also connect with your fellow screenwriters for inspiration. You could also connect with industry pros ranging from literary managers to agents as well. And they've created a virtual space for you to be able to do it. So it's not just something for you to watch. It's something where you could connect with other writers, and connecting during this time of socially distanced interaction is always a great way to go. As our sponsors, the Screencraft Writers Summit has given us a discount coupon code so you could save 10% on your admission to this virtual event. Just use discount coupon code QA Podcast. That's the letter Q, the letter A, and the word podcast all slammed together, and that will save you 10% off your admission over at screencraft.org/summit. Of course, while you're surfing around online, don't forget to check out Backstory Magazine as well. Folks, you could read an entire free issue over at backstory.net or via our iPad app Backstory. And if you like what you've read, I hope you become a subscriber by using discount coupon code SAVE5. That'll save you $5 off a 1-year subscription, give you access to any new content we produce, and of course, give you access to our archive, which we are continuing to add old issues to. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have you all support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. And folks, if you ever want to reach out to me, you could find me running my Twitter account of Yo Goldsmith, or the Backstory Magazine account on Twitter, which is known as Backstory_mag. And I also run the Instagram accounts for both. So you could find me on Instagram as Yo Goldsmith, or you could find me on Instagram as Backstory_mag. And I also have a Facebook fan page. I don't really check it that often, but you can find me there sometimes. I'll try and reply a little more this year than I have been in the past. And you could always send me an email at yogoldsmith@gmail.com. I promise not to respond immediately, but I will do my best. But look, I'm an easy guy to find. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.